Yeah.
So,
Yeah, go ahead. Take it away.
I guess I could use the microphone too, even. Woohoo.
I mean, you don't really need to use the microphone in this.
Yeah, but the audio people in the audio land won't be able to hear it, and if we don't listen back. Good morning. I'm Bill Cerveny. We have a pretty busy agenda this morning. I'm one of the co-chairs. Brian is the other co-chair. Brian's going to start passing around blue sheets. There's this note well thing, which means that any submission, blah, 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 it can, made in working in meeting rooms and in lists and stuff like that, become part of the IETF. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't expect...
Has anybody in the room not seen this? Have you made it to Friday morning?
Yeah, hey, you should read it carefully then.
Huh? Yeah, I mean, you should read it on your own time, right?
Oh, you don't want me? Okay, yeah, okay. So that's 30 seconds gone. So I put note takers in the small letters. I think both Sarah and Maris are note takers, but if someone else was willing to help, I think they'd be okay with that. I do need a Jabber scribe if there's any activity on the Jabber. I don't know if that's the case. Yeah, I haven't checked the Jabber thing. Well, if I do that, everyone will see it. I got stars to hand out to anyone who wants to be a Jabber scribe. And like I say, there are 35 left, so I could give out stars for other things.
We got a few remotes, so we do need a Jabber scribe.
Okay, so we do need a Jabber scribe. Is anyone willing to do that?
Heads down Friday morning, I understand.
It's really easy. I think he's just stretching his arm, yeah. Okay, yeah, Jabber scribe, it really, yeah, it's no big deal.
This is in the Jabber, This is in the Jabber room, you just look to see if there are questions?
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do my best. This is the low impact one. He'll get steeper from there.
Okay. So what's happened since that IETF in Hawaii? LMAP path has become an RFC 7398. Congratulations. Rate problem is now in the RFC editor queue. And IPPM IPsec 09 is awaiting a write-up from the area director. At least that's what it says on the document page.
Have I not done that?
No, you haven't done that. That's...
Abuse me.
Path is not published, it's all 48?
Well, it's about 48.
Okay.
And they've done this to me again during the night again. And it's like 3 in a row. It's only 48 during the meeting.
Yeah. Well, you're here,
there you
so
go.
you'll have plenty of time.
So where's everything else? So working group documents. There are 2 documents that are waiting for a write-up from me. My plan was to do it this week, and yeah, that's before I've discovered yet again that things are kind of busy this week. Model-based metrics, that's been updated. We're going to talk more about that. Metric registry, been updated. I guess that's 02 now. Checksum trailer has been updated on March 9th. And Type P monitor was updated on December 18th.
And I'll add that Checksum trailer has finished working group last call. That March 9th, 2015 revision was addressing last call comments. Al, did you have a look at that to see that that was okay with the comments that you had on that? Okay. Oh yeah, right. Yeah, the title, right. Yeah, I think he changed the name. So, yeah. So this one is awaiting a document shepherd write-up, which is Al. Thank you very much for volunteering to do that.
Woohoo! Okay, then lastly, we should note that the next session there's going to be a transport area open meeting. That's going to be in Venetian Room, 11:30 to 13:20. Is that right? 11:30?
Yeah.
Okay. I got to check out. Oops. 11:50. Okay. And a particular interest, IPPM is sort of looking for a new home in a different area
Maybe
at this
looking for a
point.
home.
Yeah, potentially. So you should find out what's going on and ask questions and voice opinions. And Al's going to say something because you have to run to the plane.
I'm sorry, I can't stay for the next session, so I thought I would say that, and I actually look at Matt's slides to see if there's actually some affinity with transport. It's because we've always been trying to measure TCP. So that's the point I wanted to raise. I won't be able to, and frankly, probably any home is as good as another. I wouldn't mind if we ended up with the same home as BMW Street as well.
Well, the question of homes is also a little bit fuzzier now with the question of how the areas are arranged and how the area directors are assigned and the cross area stuff. And I think IPPM, yeah, personally, I think IPPM has, it's at the intersection of a couple of traditional areas. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the TSB area talk about this.
So that will be at 11:20, 11:50. Here's the agenda, pretty busy, and let's see, are we still on time? Oh, we're 2 minutes behind. So let's start with, well, I guess I'll let Brian take over. And we're starting off with checksum trailer discussion.
Actually, do we need to have a discussion on checksum trailer? I think this one's actually, we put this one on the agenda in case there were any additional working group last call comments. Tal's not here, correct? I did not think he was going to be here. I don't see him in the Jabber room. So if anyone has any last call comments on this one, speak now, or we will go ahead and send it up. Going once, going twice, sold to nobody. Got some time back there.
Okay, now we're up to Greg's discussion. Oh.
Well, the document has been stable, and we appreciated the conservative for the working group last fall. So your comments all welcome, and I hope that we can proceed and in Prague we'll have some progress with that.
So this is in regards to Type Monitor?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, yeah. This is the type of
Okay.
basically and
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, that's the slide, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Rick.
So who's read the document, Type Monitor? 1, 2. I'm assuming you've read it, Greg.
Yeah.
3, 4. So we will start working group last call on this either today or Monday, depending on if we, when I get a chance to, depending on when we get a chance to click the button in the data tracker. And that'll run for 2 weeks. So everyone who's read it, have one last look at it. There have been a couple of changes in the last rev, but it has been pretty stable ever since it was a individual. So yeah, we'll take that one to the list then. So Marcelo. Yeah, we're running kind of fast.
Good. Sorry.
Good. No, don't worry. Blue sheet.
And I should also add that the speakers need to speak within the pink box for Mini Deco.
Yeah, go for it. Is the microphone not on? Can you check that? Seems to think it has battery.
Okay, so I'm here to talk about the performance metrics registry. So this is like the 9th iteration of this draft. So hopefully we are nearly done. So we, as you may remember, we provided this integrated draft that includes both active and passive measurements metrics, and we have a few reviews among ourselves. So, and these are the changes resulting from our last reviews. I think we are kind of converging by now. So I have a meeting yesterday with Al and with Benoit, and we kind of agreed. So I hope that in like 3 weeks or something we will have like the final draft ready for working group final review or something like that. So so some modifications we did. We removed all the text regarding the performance metric directorate, right? That was just there as, yeah. And we keep only the performance metric experts that will be the ones reviewing the metrics, right? We changed the performance metric to allow for externally defined metrics, not only the funds in RFCs, but some other SDOs that can actually can define them, right? There was some discussion about whether to keep or not the definitions for passive and active measurements within the draft, given that Al now has this draft that actually provides these definitions. What we don't want is for this draft to be waiting for the other draft to progress. Right? So what we did is we kept them on the draft as long as the other draft doesn't actually move forward. If, when we are ready to ship this to the ISG, the other draft is in good shape, I mean, meaning that it's already in the ISG or something like that, that we make sure that it will not stall this one, we will be gladly remove the definition from there and put a pointer to the other document. But we don't want this to be like another element to delay this draft. Okay? We split section 5 because it seems to be like a bit of a mess there. Several things put together. We split now into 2 different types of, two different sections. Right, and we finally agreed yesterday to include a URL as another column, as some other registries have. So the URL will uniquely identify the metric, but it also be a pointer to a text file that will contain all the information for of the metric. Right, this is basically a presentation issue, right? So maybe it's easier for some people or for some devices to parse this when you provide a URL in a text file in there, right? So we just did that. I mean, we agreed that, but it's not in V0 in the version 2 that it's up there, because that we agreed yesterday, right? So this is one of the changes I need to make. Open issues, there are not really open issues, but it's things to do, right? We need to provide a proper definition of the filter column for passive measurements, because the text that it's there is very fuzzy and probably not good, right? So we're working on that. We need to provide some examples of passive metrics in different places of the document, right? And then the other thing that I need to do is Barbara make a review. Thanks for that. I haven't been able to process it completely. We have been talking a bit with Al about this. One of the comments you made is that whether there is any part of the registry that should be machine parsable. So I was talking yesterday to Benoit about this, and basically what we think is that the whole registry should be available in a format like a CSV format or something like that you can download. So I mean, like so that a device can actually download and understand what are the different metrics that are available. But we don't think that beyond that, the content of the different columns, like there are columns that provide like the filter or sampling distribution or we don't think that we need to actually provide a schema for that in order for more automatic processing. That's how we feel about it. I don't know if that suits you or not. Because, I mean, if we go in the way of defining a schema for all the columns, that's not sure that's, I mean, it will take you a couple of years more to finish this document.
The one? Yes. Yeah, okay.
The only ones that really, or a couple that really popped out at me were the assignment of the fixed parameters, that it seemed to me that it could be really useful if somebody could just download the set of fixed parameter values that were expected for this particular instantiation of this metric. That's what you call it. Terminology is going away on this. And then also the roles, just to make sure that, you know, there's consistency in the roles. So those are the only ones that really help.
Yeah, but the problem there is that every metric will define a given input parameter based on whatever they need, right? So it's not very trivial to put like I guess like a schema for that it's not a very generic one. You see what I mean? I mean, we can basically say, okay, this column will contain name of the input parameter and range of values, or something like that, right? But I don't think we can.
Basically use JSON type of naming convention.
Okay.
I think it would be very simple.
And
Okay.
I would suggest at the as an individual, at the risk of drawing Marcelo's ire at saying we need a 10th revision of this. So this seems like a good idea to me, having a restricted set of parameters that can be machine readable, but then you might need a registry of those parameter names. I apologize for that, but.
I hear what you're saying, but I was thinking that if the people who are actually kind of approving the registry entries could simply make sure that for a given, measurement method that it's consistent across all registry entries for that particular method, I think it would be doable.
I think so. Yes, and as long as there's some description somewhere in the text about the implementation, about the points at which those parameters are bound to, that's fine. Yeah, I think the parameter names registry is probably overkill in that case. So the thing that I wanted to jump in and say, ooh, no, this is really scary, is when I see the definition of the filter column, and it's like, okay, we're going to build yet another filtering language for packet filtering and flow filtering and stateful something filtering. And the only one that I know of is you just pick a programming language that has a data model for doing things with bytes, and you write it in C. And we don't want to put C code in the registry. But for the parameter things, that sounds like.
Okay.
Thanks, Marcelo. Finally, not finally, but including in the future version, this idea of the URL that's a it's something I've argued strongly for. You're right, it's been about presentations, but at the end of the day, it's usability. Thanks for that. I think that may help the folks that are listening who want to eventually download this and compare the fixed parameters to some other set of fixed parameters. The bottom line is fixed parameters are fixed for one metric, and they're very likely to change for another indexed metric. So there's still going to be variables to everyone writing an implementation, and they can very good. They can easily change.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, what we need is to provide some form of format for the both fixed and input parameters. That would be okay. Okay, I can do that.
JSON map.
So what are next steps?
If we believe what we said, the 16th of April, we should have a new version of that.
Okay, and do a working group last call at that point?
I would think that we can do a working group last call or something like that.
Okay.
At that stage. Hopefully.
So go ahead, Al, if you have a point to that.
Another point is that folks are really going to review this during the working group set of performance metrics which would essentially populate the registry. In other words, if you're looking at these columns and so forth, you have trouble imagining what information would go there. We've got a lot of good examples. And in my response to Barbara, there's plenty of links to the draft.
That's draft Bernoulli initial IPPM initial registry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I do have one other comment about whether or not the purpose of this could also be to provide the format that could be used by registries across the industry. I didn't see that in the slide.
As I said, I didn't really parse all your review. I'm sorry for that. I mean, so
Could you?
I'm not sure what is actionable about this particular comment that you just said. I mean,
The format is beautiful, it's perfect. It's just that the reading of the thing is all about the IAM registry and how, this is all about the entries that go in the IAM registry. And there's, other than one term about proprietary registries, and that term never actually gets used outside of the definitions, there's no mention or suggestion of the existence of other registries or the ability of other registries to use the same format.
okay, you just want to put a statement there
That sounds like a paragraph.
yeah. Let's
To add to the document.
Like a sentence that basically says, if someone else wants to use this format, it would be great. Or that's what you have in mind, or something else?
Yeah, and maybe just a little bit of the changing of a few other places that imply that this is only for the IAM registry, but it is pure textual. The format of the registry is great.
Could you propose a diff? That would be great.
And I offered to. I just wanted to know
Yeah.
if you agreed on it first.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea to me, and it sounds like a good idea to me. So. Yeah, done. Thank you very much. I did want to ask, I was unable to make it to LMAP. Actually, I've been unable to make it to LMAP the past 3 times because they keep scheduling things against it, even though I asked nicely. So for those who were in LMAP and are, I don't know that there was any discussion about this time, but what we're talking about here with this registry is in line with what LMAP needs out of a registry, and we're on track for delivering them that in time for them to use it. Yes?
So, Marcelo, clearly aligned with the information model and the framework.
Yep.
The work on the protocol and the data model is still ongoing, right? So that's, I think we're on time.
Yep.
Right, because the work that is just
Yep.
Being adopted. There is one draft that it's being adopted now on the data model, right? So I think we're in time. I don't know if, I hope they will use it, but.
Just asking, is there anything that we need to be worried about or pay special attention to? And that sounds like a no. So this is all, there are no exceptions here, and we're going to keep going as we're going, and everything will run on time, and good. Okay, thank you very much. Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Mathis.
You're early, but you still have officially 20 minutes.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Oh, you want to give me the...
Oh, yeah. Please describe the history of internet measurement. Be brief.
You think he's joking. I'm actually going to give 2 talks here. The first one is 2 slides on the document that was on the title about model-based metrics. And the second one is sort of introducing a larger problem that I would like this group to take on. So document changes are actually been pretty minor. The one thing that distressed me a little bit is we had to drop the cubic model from the document. It turns out the way that the calculation was done isn't really invertible, and it's a PhD thesis worth of work to fix it. So the solution seemed to drop it. There's some other things. We missed the security section and things like that. I believe it's ready for the last call. I have one editing oops in it, and other than that. So one of the things I wanted to point out is that this sort of distills down, it provides a mapping between TCP performance and IP performance. And it boils down to these 6 requirements. Some of them are really obvious, like the link has to be faster than the rate you want it to run. And the packet loss has to be low enough. That's sort of not unexpected. There's actually two different requirements on queuing having to do with getting it out of slow start, where you're sending at rate which is twice what the bottleneck rate is. And also, if you do things like stretch acts and stuff like that, you can't prevent the current TCPs tend to send line rate bursts, and you have to have some tolerance for line rate bursts. And then there's also some issues having to do with the self-clock and whether or not the channel allocation breaks that. And finally, that when you actually do cause congestion, that the link doesn't do something that destabilizes TCP. And this is actually something that was just clarified a little bit in the draft, but the text has been there for a while. So I think it's ready for working group last call. The only request I have is we not do these concurrently with the previous document. Any comments or questions? I've seen a few puzzled looks, but I think it's mostly people who haven't read it.
Yeah, who's read it? Okay.
Who's read some version of it?
Who's read some version of it? Who's read some version of it that has a really good reason not to read the update? Who's read some version of it who has a really good reason not to read the update for the working group last call to make sure? So it has changed. So from the earliest versions, it's changed quite a bit. From the most recent version, it hasn't changed very much.
Right.
Please, actually, I think we're going to go ahead and start a last call on this after we start the last call on Type P monitor. That might be 20 minutes after we start the last call on Type P monitor.
Do we have to do them concurrently? Do we have to do them concurrently?
I think we can do them concurrently because they're two completely different audiences. I mean, one is like looking at the metrics definition, and one is looking at specific things that you can do with WAMP and TWAMP. I wouldn't do it otherwise, but yeah. So I think this is ready for working group last call. I need to take another.
Okay.
I need to take another hard look at it.
Okay.
Because I need to take another hard look at it, I think I'm going to make that a 3-week working group last call as opposed to a 2-week working group last call. And I think there's enough to. So I'll go ahead.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and start that.
Sounds good.
Unless there are any major objections to that. Al, you're going to object to working group last calling?
No, I'm not. I'm going to ask a quick question. Did we get rid of the alternate statistical
Yes,
method?
that's
Okay.
gone.
All right. Then I've got no problem with as co-author starting working group.
We had a section repeated because Al and I told the story differently, and I finally took out the one that I put in. So. Okay, this is really a separate presentation, and it's about sort of the bigger context from which model-based metrics came from. And this work actually predates my work collaborating with Al, and so I took his name off the slide, but I'm going to hope he's going to stay involved. And this sort of goes back to sort of the bigger question about why we're here and what we're trying to measure and so on. This is the outline. I'm going to jump into it. So if you were involved in the research and education internet community in the 90s, there was this recurrent problem that many of us experience where you have an end-to-end application, say FTP, and it wouldn't work end-to-end, but if you tested each section with something like iPerf, every section tested good. And this is a pervasive pattern, actually for the next 20 years, that very clearly makes a statement that bulk transport capacity and measurements used with TCP didn't provide good insight, didn't provide good understanding into how the network worked. And they're not useful for diagnostics, and they don't meet any of the basic requirements for metrics, especially no vantage independent repeatability. There was this thing called the Meta Center, which caused all NSF supercomputing centers to get together. That's supposed to be NSF, I'm sorry. And at the end of the NSF net, there was a solicitation to build this new VBNS research network. And I was actually kind of appalled because at the time, the research community was essentially divesting itself of the infrastructure that was to become the commercial backbone, the commercial internet. And why were we building in the R&E community a parallel backbone rather than putting that same funding into building up the commercial internet? And what it seemed to me is all we needed to do is write a service level agreement for performance. It's like, wait a second, that's a hard problem. So I was at a meeting at San Diego in the conference room, that the big auditorium in the downstairs SDSC conference room, which is where CADA holds all their conferences today, and did a whiteboard sketch with a bunch of people. I believe Casey was there, and I know some of the other people who were there. I remember the room vividly. I can't precisely date it, where we designed an ISP scale metric, and it had to do with, for a given user, you want to be able to iterate across all the endpoints that they measure against, that they want to exchange traffic with, and then for an ISP, you want to iterate across all users, and you want to have some notion of assigning responsibility for the performance to the ISP that you're considering purchasing capacity from, and the rest of the internet. So we did this sketch, but there was a whole lot of stuff missing. Now, this is in 1993. This is before the macroscopic model was done. This is before we knew how to do a huge number of things. So that conversation was actually the reason that I pushed to run the BOFs that was the start of this working group. So that working group actually came directly from this conversation. This working group came from that conversation more than 20 years ago. KC was in the room as a graduate student, and although I haven't connected the dots, I believe that was actually the origin of CADA as well, the same meeting. So this working group, the charter avoided stating that particular problem because we knew it was too hard. We knew we didn't understand it. And so the charter has kind of a donut hole in it, that the charter for this working group never talked about measuring transport capacity and the way that we wanted to put it in. And we made some progress, but we were always thinking about the problem in terms of my original statement about concatenation of path performance. And we got stuck. Some things happened, but we got stuck. And I wandered away and worked on TCP for a while and did things like selective acknowledgement and stuff like that. Here's a restatement of the problem. You can't do this algebra on path performance. And we didn't know how to do it. And that was sort of crucial to making a performance metric, because if you can't do algebra on it, if you can't do predictive measurements, if you can't subtract out measurement tail circuits, it's not very useful. So the other thing that we didn't really understand at the time is a lot of the measurement was absolutely obscured by a bunch of TCP problems in a very non-uniform way. And these came to be fixed in Linux and Windows 7 when those operating systems rolled out, roughly 10 years ago or less, that can confuse the issues. So it turns out that the lameness of TCP actually masked a whole bunch of other problems that we didn't know about then. That TCP was lame completely masked buffer bloat. It completely masked the fact that TFRC doesn't really work in the way you would like it to work. And it also hid the fact that in the core of the internet, we didn't really have a capacity allocation architecture that worked. The slides will be posted, don't worry. Without a capacity, we didn't notice that the capacity allocation didn't work because it seemed as though there was and this caused the impression that the internet provides a mechanism of fairness. And none of these things are really true. And we're now sorting out the consequences. So in the newer TCP implementations, it's actually TCP auto-tuning that fixed a lot of these problems. You're now in a situation where if I connect a pair of machines, I have a long-running TCP flow between a pair of machines connected anywhere in the world, that flow will either raise the round-trip time or the loss rate or both. Anywhere in the world, any connections. A single flow changes the statistics of the network today. And what this means is that, well, the technical property is that TCP performance is actually an equilibrium process, very much like equilibrium in chemistry or something like that. You have interactions that are going in opposite directions. And these the circular dependency means that TCP, unencumbered TCP, is not good for measurement, because what you always measure is the reflection of the congestion that you yourself caused. That's all you measure if you measure unconstrained TCP. And you don't know how it relates to the properties of the network. It's more about the properties of the end system. So model-based metric is about fixing that problem. So model-based metrics is about testing with open-loop TCP, where the traffic mimics the behavior of TCP at the specified performance, where you measure IP properties. You look at the loss statistics caused by the network at those properties and predict whether or not the path can support TCP at that rate by meeting those 7 criteria that I mentioned earlier. And so the singleton changes from being how fast can I go to will it reliably go at a particular speed, and the natural I forgot the term, population statistic, the natural summary statistics is actually a weighted probability. It's a probability of success. And now we have all the pieces to fill in that whiteboard. Because model-based metrics provides the algebra necessary to make sense out of IP metrics, which we know how to measure independently, which we know how to measure with existing RFCs actually, to make them tell a story about TCP performance without actually having to measure TCP performance on the path sections. So, this is not internet draft yet. Does it belong here? Questions, comments? Volunteers?
The chair has spoken. Al Morton. So yeah, it sounds like the mic's really working now. That's great. So I'm still willing to be a co-author, as I said. And we've been doing, in fact, the reason why Matt and I met up is that we were doing something sort of like he envisioned, and they were amazingly close. We've sort of taken different paths to evaluate these methods. I think that if we can examine those aspects as well as part of this, in other words, where AQM is not necessarily, and progressive loss is not necessarily a requirement, then I think that that's worthwhile. It's worthwhile taking a look at as we move forward here.
Yes, Al and I have a little bit of disagreement. Is that
no? It's an ongoing discussion.
Ongoing discussion about the last bullet and the phenomena that we see at scale. And I was aware of it actually in the ATM days. Is that if the loss is not progressive and the TCP is not really robust, it takes a timeout, which blows the model away. New TCPs are getting better, so the progressiveness of the loss is more tolerant, but
But maybe the solution to that is, instead of looking at a long-term loss ratio over a measurement, looking at individual sort of burst statistics. I think there's multiple ways to skin this cat.
The way the current text says is you should not lose more than half the packets in any given round trip, and there is, for instance, token bucket policers that do not meet that criteria. Whether or not their symptoms are as serious as this draft assumes is debatable.
Yeah.
They were absolutely fatal to previous TCPs. But.
All right, so there's a long line behind me, I assume, and I'm just going to get out of the way. Thank you.
Brian.
Hi, Brian Trammell, as an individual. Can you go back to the last slide, actually? So that's actually probably one that we want to put up here, right? So there's the bag, there's the ask. Here's what the pieces are. So basically what you want to do is you want to take the model-based metrics piece and you want to build the framework around it that was up on the whiteboard.
Right, which is really about, most of that framework was about estimating the performance to the Alexa
Yes.
500,
Yes.
for instance. So the
And-
question you ask is this ISP, is ISP Alice good enough to reach the Alexa 500
Yep.
at 4 megabits per second with
Yep.
2 nines, given that adjacent ISP Bob is no worse than Alice?
Are these, when we're talking about defining the tests, how much can we change about the endpoint behavior during those tests? So, I mean, we have this thing in model-based metrics where we have the methodology is quite concrete.
The methodology is quite concrete in terms of essentially replacing congestion control, but nothing else.
Yes.
So model-based metrics wants to control the traffic.
Yes. Let me actually ask the question I want to ask.
Okay.
If we're going to go forward with new kinds of encapsulation for transport evolution, it would be extremely useful to be able to use a test that asks almost exactly this question with the same congestion control and the same control loop on the outside, but with different packet framing. So as this is, I want to run MBM over SPUD.
Over what?
SPUD.
Okay. so
SPUD, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. SPUD.
So
I want to run
this
MBM, I want to run
document
MBM over SPUD, and I want to compare it to MBM over TCP on certain paths.
Okay,
to know
this
if-
document specifically punts on type P. It says type P
Yep.
has to be specified elsewhere. That's part of type
Yep.
P.
Yep, okay. Yeah, then I'm a giant fan of this.
Pardon?
I'm a giant fan of this. I'm not saying I have the cycles to I don't want to stand up and say I'll be a co-author because I don't want to lie to you. But I think this is really interesting.
Thank you in spirit.
I will help. I don't know how.
Tim.
Hi, my name is Tim Shepard, and Matt. What is the estimated probability that an ISP? I'm reading the slide. What is the estimated probability that an ISP can support my application? And I think you've generally been thinking in throughput rate.
So,
But
this document is specifically a bulk transport capacity document. It would be pretty easy to morph it into a jitter requirement for other kinds of applications.
Actually, I'm not sure we care much about jitter. We just care about latency. And throughput high throughput is a means to achieving low latency. Usually you want high throughput because you want low latency from when I requested to get an object to when I've got the whole object.
So one of the things that so almost all of this is clear in my mind, except for one detail, and that is, suppose I have ISPs Alice and Bob that I want to compare. Alice and Bob have equivalent quality infrastructure and load factors, but Alice peers in all the right places, and Bob peers in lower East Podunk. And so Bob's average path length to the content is further. How does that manifest itself in the metric? And the answer should be that the parameter which is used in the model, which is the round trip time, is somehow inflated for the fact that Bob has worse round trip times. I don't quite know how to describe that piece, but all the rest of the pieces I think are pretty clear.
Just a random thought is that I think some people shopping for network capacity from somewhere to somewhere else have in some cases chosen to use microwave links instead of fiber optics because of the lower latency for like trading applications.
Correct.
And is
So
this something
one
that-
could imagine people asking for minimum RTT specs. In fact, there was an RFQ a couple years back that's people were asking for RTTs that could not be implemented at the speed of light.
Right.
I was going to pretty much the same input as Tim. Christian Wittemer from Microsoft. What I see here is that a lot of the models are about how fast can I transmit. A big problem we have is latency. You might see a pattern. And yes, a part of latency is how fast can I get this big piece of information from one point to another. Another part of latency, which is a different application. I have applications that are effectively sending few messages at random intervals. And those applications are effectively sampling the data rate of the sampling what's in the network.
They're sampling, and you may or may not be warming the radios first.
Well, they are sampling, and they are effectively conditioned by the highest peak of the queuing and all that. Not so much, the average matters if you do the average things, but what customers complain about is the peak, is that these particular phone calls, the guy took 10 seconds to answer because the event did not arrive in time.
Right. So the model-based metric draft, the one that we just sort of put in a working group last call, is clearly about bulk capacity, but it actually, I don't remember how much it was removed. There was a little bit of language in it about the fact that the same approach could be used for other properties.
Yes, and I would love that it be actually used.
Noted.
This is from the Jabber room. I apologize. I'm probably going to mangle the name. Facultad di Ingegneria. Why measure clean network properties? The important thing to measure is user experience. That is, the performance the user gets in normal network sharing conditions.
So Facultad di Ingeniería, that means engineering school, right? So somebody's using a group account.
Yeah, so this is true, although the problem with QoE metrics in general is they are very hard to calibrate and very hard to define at scale, and in many ways harder to measure. My perspective has always been that you want to have good science about what the lower layers should do, and separate science which relates the behavior of the lower layers to the behavior of the applications and quality of experience. Oh. You need to measure it at both levels, and you need to do the science to show how one level relates to the other level. And my expertise has always been measuring in the lower level. It's that I don't mean to dismiss the higher level. It's just not where I've put my attention.
Al Morton. So what initially you're planning to do here, and what we've done in MDM to some degree, is bridge the gap between network performance and some distance up the stack.
Right. We're moving. This is the first step at having a real map between transport performance, end-to-end transport performance, and IP performance. And we want the IP performance stuff to be done in ways that make it real metrics. So when I think of a real metric, if you look at something like milk fat, the reason the definition for milk fat works is because anybody can measure it, and they understand what it means. And we don't have that for TCP. This will bring a version of a way of doing IP measurements, which can be real metrics, to give you an understanding and an expectation for TCP performance.
Right. And so above TCP performance is a bigger thing called quality of service.
Yeah,
there's above that, when you add user context and an application, immediacy,
and there's actually a layer.
Quality of experience.
There's actually a layer in between, which is application performance.
Right.
Measuring, response time for keystrokes and stuff.
There's a paper I wrote which looks at an early version of model-based metrics and talks about it in the context of QoE, because when you make measurements as a user, it affects your future experience. It becomes part of your expectation feedback path, and that's something that the folks in quality of experience were a little bit surprised about, but with billions and billions of measurements being made on the internet, just ask speedtest.net site, you'll see the number growing every day. there's an influence there on QoE. So QoE comes from, formulation of QoE comes from many dimensions, and actually making measurements is one. I'll be glad to send a link to that paper to the list.
So are we done here?
So I think so. So the ask basically is you wanted to see if there was interest in the room for continuing this work as an individual and then targeting it as working group.
That's correct.
Well, I think there was certainly some interest. Who thinks that this doesn't fit in IPPM and would like Matt to take it somewhere else because this is completely just not totally, is completely out of scope? Any hands for that? I didn't think so.
Humming would be okay.
Huh? No, I mean we can have a discussion. We can have a discussion about whether this. We're talking
No, I
about.
was thinking of the raise your hand so everybody else can turn and stare at you.
Right. No, I mean, because I think in that case we really did want to hear about why, right?
Yeah. It's fair to ask, does anybody want to speak against it?
Yeah. That. Yeah, I think this certainly seems to me, Chair Hat, looking at the charter on, that it fits very nicely within what
Funny
we were
thing.
fits very nicely within the charter and what we were thinking we wanted to do with this. It is kind of a departure from a lot of sort of the framework for doing IPPM, but it needs to be in order for model-based metrics to be really useful.
The framework was narrowed because we knew this
Yeah.
problem was unsolvable.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to make the deliverables contain something that we knew we couldn't do.
All right, Matt, send us a draft.
Aye, aye, sir.
Thank you very much. So that was it for working group work and work related to working group work. Next up is, I put Al Morton question mark on the agenda, and nobody told me any different, so Al's going to be here speaking about this. on Yang for TWAMP.
Very possessive microphone stands. So I'm Al Morton, as you've now learned. Some new folks have joined the IETF work in this draft. Ruth Civil, in particular, she's done a lot of work on this. Lianshu Zhang, you actually know as Vero, and so she's known to us. Rashad and Mahesh have done some reasonable amount of work here and are known at the IETF. And of course, Costas is known to the working group. He's been on the IPsec. So the six of us, and I emphasize six because I got that number wrong once. The six of us have put together a draft on Yang for TWAMP. Next slide.
Actually, you can slide it if you want to.
Oh, okay. It's going to be, all right.
Yeah, okay. No, we'll do it. That's fine.
All right, thanks. So the motivation. Why now? Well, we actually know all these things. The large-scale measurements. The large-scale measurements that are in progress. Network virtualization means that there's many more measurement points. Multi-vendor management and harmonization. Speaking as an operator, that's one of the things we seek pretty strongly. So that should be no surprise. So, and Yang is a fairly obvious choice now too. It's a very popular. It seems to be the next generation for this. Next slide, please. So when Yang and NetConf and RESTConf meet TWAMP, and that's the correct pronunciation, TWAMP. We have these usual control clients and session senders. They're communicating various control protocols and test protocols. We basically want to configure them, and we want to get them launched on their way in a standardized way that we can use across multiple vendors. And so that's where we need the Yang model and NetConf and RESTConf to do that. Next slide. So when you go into a model building application or task like this, what are the main challenges? Well, I hadn't done this before, so I thought I would list them out, and that way share the experience. You have to identify the groupings and the functions, the natural things that are going to segment this particular model, and determine the hierarchy of those groupings and functions, because you're going to need to establish that as well, and then all of the parameters that are involved. And these are very often parameters that are well defined in the model. These are input factors to the protocol or whatever, but some are not in the RFCs, and they're going to be sort of hidden, or they're in typical use, but they're still essential parts of this, and it's important to put them in if you think that's the way it should go. So what we have is one module which has 4 main containers, and those containers are the main protocol entities that you saw in the picture before: the control client, the server. They talk to each other using the control protocol. We have the session sender, session reflector, and then there's many, many parameters, which I'm about to show you. Next slide. So here's a nice picture. This is the UML classes for the control client, which is that's really the entity in charge of most of the things in a TWAMP control connection setup, and the subsequent test sessions that get set up. And so if you are, hi Mahesh, one of the co-authors just joined in time. Feel free to take my seat there for a moment. All right, so here we go. So if you're performing as a control client, and you may not be, you may only be a simple reflector sitting in the network that needs to be configured, and you're going to run tests with sort of any acceptable control client that you know about. So there's various features which are conditional here, and aspects of the model that you have to that you would support. So in the control client, we figured out pretty quickly that we needed to handle the problem of deciding what mode to operate in. There's lots of optional modes for TWAMP. There are lots of ways that you could combine those modes. And maybe as an operator of a test system, you have a set of sort of a list of preferences in which you would like to operate your system. You'd like to operate with encryption and with some other option. On the other hand, if you can't get that option, and then you'd rather operate in the unauthenticated mode. So there's different ways that you might choose to combine the modes of operation. We have that possibility in this mode preference chain list. There's also authentication and encryption. You need a keychain for that, so we've got that. And so those are kind of top-level lists. And then we get down to the list of the, all the TWAMP control client connection parameters here. So we've got a name for that, IP addresses, and so forth. If you, obviously there's lots of ways to look at all the detail here, but and a slide is probably not the best one, but we've tried to include everything here. In fact, including stuff that wasn't clearly obvious that you needed to do from TWAMP, like for example the derived key length. If you go through the various supporting RFCs, you'll see that you need this parameter and so forth. So we've done a lot of digging to pull these into the fore. Next slide, please. So underneath the control connection, then we start to talk about TWAMP session requests, and this is when you're actually configuring a test session. So now you need IP addresses again and port numbers and so forth. And here's one place where we tied the model very closely to the performance metrics registry. We decided that if you're going to run a test under a test session, the simplest way to call out all of the additional parameters is to refer to the registry, and then to expect the results back in the way that the registry describes it. So there's what I think a very efficient tie-in to the work that's already going on in IPPM here, and it relieves us from having to duplicate a lot of work here in the TWAMP module. So let's see. Okay, so this is the tree view. Oh no, I'm sorry. Next slide. And this is probably unreadable, so I'll just sort of skip over it. But this is, you can take my word for it that this that this thing is it's generated by the usual generators for Yang, Piang, and so forth. But I will say that the pictures came from AT&T's interactive development environment, which Kevin D'Souza and Jonathan Pan put together on top of the clips, and with I think a GraphViz program generated the UML. So just to give the credit where it's due, that was a lot of help and made it a lot easier to visualize these things. Next slide. So in next steps, we seek reviewers from the TWAMP community, and I should thank Greg for putting his comments on the list. We'll deal with those when we can, Greg. Eventually, we're seeking working group adoption, but we'd like to see some folks like Greg did to read it first. And are there any comments?
Greg Mirsky, Ericsson. Thank you, Al, for acknowledging comments. I would like the working group to discuss whether TWAMP Lite has to be modeled, whether it's a part of this effort or is a separate effort. Because I know that there are a lot of implementations, and I believe that it would be very useful operationally to have TWAMP Lite model.
Any opinions on that?
Hi, Rich Foot with Octalucent. I would agree with that. There's a lot of use in the TWAMP Lite model. I'd love to see it modeled here.
So so TWAMP Lite isn't the standards track thing.
It's the informational appendix.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it would be interesting to see what about the standards track version would have to change in order to support TWAMP Lite. For example, if you could go back to the figure before that one. Yes. Okay. So in TWAMP Lite, you don't have the control client and you don't have the server. All you really have are packet formats for a test session. And it would seem to me that I guess the challenge would be to the folks who would like to see something specific for TWAMP Lite. What about the session sender and session reflector containers that we currently have is insufficient to get a session going there?
Well, there are at least two versions of session reflector that are now part of 53, 57. One is described in Appendix 1 as can be characterized as stateless, and another one is described in accepted errata that can be characterized as stateful. Everything else, yes, I agree, they're pretty much the same. There are some differences in implementation on DHCP treatment, but I would like to work with the authors, and we can do either as a part of this effort or as a separate Yang model.
So let me rephrase this question. Actually, I can do this. So basically, in the Yang models right now, the hook from the Yang model is through the control, to sort of the TWAMP control plane. And it sounds to me the ask for TWAMP Lite is to essentially replace the TWAMP control plane with Yang. Have I misunderstood that?
It's absolutely.
That's absolutely what. So that seems like a separate effort to me, because here you've got sort of the layering is Yang over the TWAMP control, and TWAMP control sets stuff up and has TWAMP data. You actually would need to pull some of the features of TWAMP control into the Yang model in order to make that work.
Yes.
And that seems like a different effort that should harmonize with this one. But it's not clear to me how much that can harmonize, because you've got two different, you're controlling it two different
ways. Yeah.
Two different ways.
At a certain extent, at least the guidance in Appendix 1, so their TWAMP Lite, are to map it to the control of their TWAMP control. So basically that It doesn't specify what way their sender and reflector can be controlled in flight, but it implies that it has to be similar, if not identical, to their control. And now, since we have different behaviors of not defined, for example, DSCP and the counters, there are more variants. But if your opinion is that it's a separate effort, I wouldn't argue with that.
Maybe it's kind of a proprietary effort, because TWAMP Lite is an informational appendix. We're focusing on the standards track work here. I would think that, in fact, one of the things that we talked about is that if we've structured the module correctly, it allows for proprietary extensions, which are currently possible. They don't have to be part of what we're talking about now, but you could potentially put something alongside of this, which is a proprietary description of the features that are in a current implementation, which are not part of this current system.
I don't think we want to have the
that's
TWAMP
valid-
versus TWAMP Lite argument again here. I don't think that's a useful use of the working group's time to go back
Okay.
and forth
Yeah.
and
Well,
swing
we can
TWAMP.
continue on the list.
Please continue it on the list. I do think it's useful to have I think it's very useful for TWAMP Lite as an effort, however we're going to characterize that, to have a Yang-based control plane. That seems like a no-brainer, and it also seems like a good idea for that to look a lot like this.
Yeah, if it was possible to do this with the sort of the if feature,
yeah,
then it might be more possible.
That's worth looking into. Greg, actually, are you planning on doing that work anyway? Yep. Please try and work with Al to sort of coordinate that so you don't completely diverge.
So I think that what we'd really like is, instead of initiating new efforts, we'd kind of like to get a review of this work going, and with the idea of future adoption, and then the other efforts can certainly learn from what we've done.
How's this? How done is this, in your opinion?
I will tell you that when the team got together in really active work in the first week of January, I think we've exchanged about 1,000 messages since then.
Okay.
So
how many more messages do you need to exchange?
and I think probably probably about 100, but some of those will be on the list now, I think.
Yeah.
And but I would say that because of the the diversity of this group and the experience with implementations, this came up. AT&T 2 years ago, AT&T had 100,000 of these T1 implementations. So we're very interested in getting the.
You have 100,000 nodes. I hope you don't have 100,000 implementations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 100,000 nodes. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Excuse
so,
me.
Matt.
Is one of them a strict subset of the other?
As Greg described, no, because there's no description of the stateless the stateless reflector.
So basically, in order to do the Yang model, I mean, the control hooks are different for the two of them, and that's what would make this a please harmonize as opposed to please do these together effort.
I was sort of thinking subset, but then realized no too.
It seems like some of the sections are subsets, but there's certain sections that are not.
Yes.
Yeah. So who else besides Greg is willing to review this? It's a good thing we have a strong and active author team then.
Yeah, keep doing it, and we'll have take some of the discussion to the list, please. I mean, what the list is there for is also sort of targeted work that is not yet adopted. Right. Yeah, let's talk about this in Prague. Do some arm twisting before then, so that you'll get more hands up in the air.
Maybe we should ask, is anyone opposed to writing a Yang module for TWAMP?
Oh yeah, okay. Does anybody think that this, we'll do the same thing. Does anybody think that this doesn't fit in the charter? Raise your hand and explain why, please. I think you got your answer.
Good, thank you.
Do you want to drive?
So OWAMP and TWAMP currently only require use of NTP time-step format, and with their development of forwarding engines and proliferation of 1588 clock synchronization, many forwarding engines natively support 1588 V2 with a full or truncated format as a timestamp, and we thought that it might be useful to give OWAMP and TWAMP, primarily that's the motivation, possibility of using in a test packets alternative timestamp format, not only NTP. So this work proposes extensions to OWAMP and TWAMP control protocols to negotiate and inform their other party of timestamp format used, and modification to their test packets to support that. So in control protocol, there are modes field being used in many extensions already. We're proposing to use it now, and we're adding 2 new flags to indicate what timestamp format is to be used, NTP and PTP. One thing that important to note is that there is a certain assumption or requirement that the control plane that's to support this extension must be able to interpret both formats, NTP and PTP, but it does not impose any requirements to support NTP timestamp format on a data plane. So the control plane interpretation is much wider. It's only software, which is supposed to be upgradable. In the test protocol, we propose to use Z-bit in an error estimate, which is currently not defined, and it's basically Z stands for must be 0. Since their native timestamp format is NTP, we propose that value of 0 be interpreted as NTP format and 1 interpreted as PTP format. And the PTP, again, I'm just using for the short, it's a PTP v2 truncated 64-bit format. So to fit the same field that's currently allocated in OWAMP and TWAMP test packet formats. For the TWAMP-wide consideration, it's up to operator to coordinate what time of timestamp to be used by the sender and reflector. We welcome comments, and we'll continue work on this proposal.
Al Morton, so here's a comment. Could you go back to the slide that had the 2 bits? There it is, yes. So I think you only need 1 flag, Greg. NTP is already mandatory. And I don't think you can have a flag that says, I don't have NTP capability. In fact, you don't really need it. Hang on.
Mm-hmm.
You can make this work with 1 flag. If you set PTP capability on the server, and that capability wants to be used by the control client, then it can accept the control connection. If you leave PTP capability 0, then the default applies. NTP is available. It's mandatory, so it's available. And if you don't want to use that, then you close the connection. So it's sufficient to have one bit here.
I agree. Basically, was talking with their NPU folks, different. They're welcome. Well, they were excited about opportunity not to support NTP format in the data plane. So thus, we opted for 2 flags because it gives a possibility of not supporting NTP and still doing TWAMP.
Yeah,
So
I don't think you can write that out though. I mean, it's a mandatory capability. I don't think
right,
you can have a flag to remove an optional flag to remove a mandatory capability.
Okay, the mandatory, it still remains mandatory in the control plane to being able to interpret it. But the data might be used only in PTP format.
Matt Mathis, I'm sorry, I haven't read this document, but I had one sort of a general suggestion, is to make sure that the language on the next slide is normative so it can be referred to by other documents. That you actually define normative nomenclature for self-describing measurement timestamps. So future documents can refer to it. Refer to this by name.
Okay.
And Al Morton will just add that, Greg, you can always choose to do a partial implementation. People have done that. It's you know. Well, what I'm saying, the distinction I'm making is that our protocol specification documents have to be clean in this regard. I don't think we can take away a mandatory capability with a flag.
So Al, I would suggest you can have a mandatory capability with a flag if you rev the protocol and obsolete the old protocol. I don't think that's what we want to do.
Right.
But I mean, there's certainly a way forward to that. If the working group decides that we want to have the ability to turn off NTP, then we're working on TWAMP v, what would that be now? V2. Okay.
Or 3WAMP.
Right, or 3. 6, TWAMP v6.
It's always permissible to update an old standard to make a previously mandatory piece of it optional. That's a straightforward update. It happens in a lot of places.
But again, that's not what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, that this is an option to do that.
Well, and also, Al, I mean, you pointed a way forward as well, is you can simply, if you don't want to support PTP, then you simply shut down.
Right.
You do the negotiation, and if you don't see the NTP flag, then you're done.
That's right. That's right.
It's a one RTT way to find out that you've done that, but this is not something that's going to happen dynamically very often, right? I mean, this is going to be you plug 2 things together and they either work or they don't.
Yeah, because basically you're doing it when you're forming the control session.
Right. So it seems fine to me that, I mean, you can even put language in here that says, in the case that a peer wants to refuse using NTP timestamps, they can simply drop.
Actually, I didn't go into I didn't copy all the steps that we already described and control protocol negotiation, how different combinations can be treated and what actions taken by their server or control client in both scenarios in OWAMP and TWAMP. But yes, you're absolutely right. There already text in the document that says, oh, if you don't want to do this, you just close the session.
Yeah. So we have this is a 32-bit flag, right? Or is this a 16-bit flag?
32.
Yeah, I don't want to burn 2 flags on this. It seems
no, me
like
neither.
3 flags because there's no. Is there a performance reason to be able to fail faster than 1 RTT here?
Well, it's okay. The reason here is not that because we want to force everybody to support NTP format. Support NTP format, it's extra tax on line cards on the fast path. So it's either requires FPGA
Yeah,
or
that-
something.
I-
So that's why people we talked to, they were excited about that, saying, okay, we already support PTP. If it can do PTP only, then it would be great. So thus we're allocated 2 flags.
It seems like this discussion is now talking past itself. I think we should probably take this to the list. Do you have another point, Al?
Just that I think this is worthwhile doing it at 1 bit, and also the other point is that we only have 32 bits to use, so we have to be very judicious, because when we start to run out of these, then we're really talking about 3 WAMP to get another 32 bits of mode in the server greeting and so forth. So let's be judicious.
Okay, we'll try to squeeze in 1 bit.
So I actually had a clarifying question on this. We're redefining the Z field. What's the Z field used for right now?
It's must be 0.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now speaking, Greg Mirsky.
So this is an update on a document that we've been presenting for, well, number of meetings. I'm asking myself. So their update is we changed the structure, but more significant to the content is that we extend the discussion of the passive measurement and passive metrics, and we added a new section as a container and added some our thoughts on the hybrid measurements. So the passive measurement method, yes, we all have some implied understanding of what passive measurement is as an observation. But what is interesting is that in particular at IETF now, we are witnessing their development of new layers in encapsulations. For example, NVO3, EVPN, BEER, service function chaining. And talking with their teams that worked on that, we try to ensure that they accommodate not only OEM being in band to guarantee active measurements, but certain format that can support passive measurement, for example, or, okay, not passive, measurements of the type like coloring marking. That in the way that this coloring marking would not affect treatment of the packet by the network, by this layer. And that, in my view, would make application of coloring marking to these layers as a passive measurement, because changing the packet does not affect data flow. So it might be that there will be some methods that will modify packets and still can be considered as a passive because they do not affect the network in any way, neither extending their packets nor changing treatment by the network. So the hybrid is, that has been discussed by the group, is a combination of active and passive.
Christian, did you have a clarifying question on the previous slide?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
How do we intend to make that work once we move to transports in which the payload is sealed and encrypted? I mean, the header is sealed and the payload is encrypted.
Well, in that case, are we talking about coloring and marking method?
Yeah.
Well, there will be a presentation on coloring and marking method, I understand, later today. But in my understanding that if something is encrypted, then it can be, at that layer level, cannot be used for coloring and marking.
Okay. Well, we probably need to think about that further.
Yeah, but it's a very good question for those who develop these new layers and their headers.
Yeah, I would actually imagine, for instance, doing coloring as part of the tunnel to provide an OM function for the tunnel. And so there's specific collaboration between the tunnel doing some marking in order to facilitate instrumentation at loss rates. For instance, marking every 1,000 packets with a single bit so I can count loss rate very easily. It's like a trivial algorithm. It takes one line of code in the tunnel and I can monitor anywhere. I can do sectionalized loss rates with a sniffer anywhere. It's a very powerful technique.
Hi, Nalini Elkins. One comment about the encryption of headers and performance metrics and so on. We're going to talk about that in ours as well. But depending on what's being used, for example, if you use ESP and IPsec, the IP extension headers are not encrypted. And so there is things that you can do, and that's something we can, we will discuss further.
Al Morton. So a question, Greg, I guess it's raised by the fact that you're planning to change some aspect of the packet. How can you guarantee that the network won't take action on that?
Because that's how their standard describing this encapsulation will be written.
So
I'm talking about only new encapsulations, like beer, like NVO3, like service function chaining. I'm not talking about existing. Existing, like MPLS and IP, that's a different story.
Right.
We're trying to work with them, and that's separate. I'm talking about only those, like we have greenfield and brownfield. So I'm talking about greenfield cases.
So that's a very important distinction to make.
Yes, I agree.
It's actually creating the coloring capability in a higher layer, wouldn't it be? And yet that's fine.
Actually,
But
Al,
still,
I'm going to ask you to defer. This is a conversation that I want to have after we've seen this draft and yours.
Okay.
Because I want to have the wider active, passive, how does this work in the brave new scary world? But we should see both of the drafts first. So I was only wanting to take the clarifying point there. And then,
Okay.
yeah, so thank you.
So we always welcome and appreciate the comments. And there are two documents now in the working group that discuss very closely related issues. So I think that it will be good if we all work together. Thank you.
So actually, let's hear about that next draft now, then.
Sure. Just want to express our view that
Yep.
we would like.
Is the spacing here intentional? Is there a okay? I always love a typographic pun at 10 in the morning.
So there really is a lot of space between microphone. Oh, sorry. Here, this is it. The pink box ready to go. Any other comments on the presentation so far? All right, so I'm Al Morton, and as the slide shows, there really is a big difference and a big distance between active and passive, and there's a lot of things that can end up in between. And so we need a set of definitions that can really handle that. So that's what I wrote this draft about. Next slide. Oh, I do that now. Okay. All right, so I had this slide last time, but I'm going to quickly represent it. That almost everybody in the room, being we didn't start the fire. There's a few people here down at the bottom. Matt Mathis, Bill Cervani, Neville is here. I saw Neville. Those were the guys who were here at the beginning. And I only started coming here in '98. If there's any, oh, Spencer, you've been around that long too. So I should have mentioned you, I think. Back to Matt's whiteboard discussions and so forth. 97? Okay. Well, that was when IPPM was chartered, at least. So that's a long time. But in any case, the notions of active and passive measurements and methods and metrics are pretty well established, I think. And that's what the community is currently using. So I said, let's document those. And let's clarify where new methods fit according to a criteria. So after a discussion with Matt yesterday, I realized the true role of definitions in standards work. Because words have meaning, but they only start to have meaning, strong meaning, within a particular context. And that context is the framework for the set of definitions. So we need definitions in our standards work to clearly communicate and also to avoid ambiguity. And that's when we really need to nail things down. So we start with, in this particular exercise, we start with fundamental terms and we build from there. So the fundamental terms are performance metric and method of measurement. And I spent a lot of time last year reviewing lots of different standards where they go after these two terms. Metric isn't universally used. There's an international standard on metrology that uses the word measurand for metric. And when I read that, I said, yeah, it's a pretty good definition, but there's no way I'm going to try to sell this to the IETF. So we have to make some small modifications along the way that are useful. And next, we treat active and passive as adjectives. We first define methods of measurement that are either active or passive. And then subsequently, we recognize that the way we've been writing our metric definitions in IPPM is to incorporate some of the active methods right into the aspects of the definition, aspects of the metric definition. And that's basically the way this has worked. If you ask the passive guys, I think they would have the same sort of take on it. And one of my favorite passive guys is nodding. So, but not being a passive guy, a passive measurement guy.
I'm not saying anything else.
So this hierarchy seemed to work. And so finally, hybrid methods are a combination of these attributes that we list out for each active and passive metrics and methods. So then, so this draft was originally presented in the sunny state of Hawaii, and since then we've gotten quite a few comments and support on the list. Tiziano Ionta, who was here, oh, he's still here. Okay, welcome back, Tiziano. He looked at the discussion area of the draft. There's a definitions section, section 3, and then a discussion section, section 4, where we begin to examine these definitions and some of the examples. And thought that there might be multiple comparison dimensions there. I think he's right. I started to write some of those down. We'll get to that in a moment. Also, he thought that this packet coloring was a hybrid form of method of measurement. And with that, I tend to agree, depending upon where the coloring is taking place, I guess, based on the clarification we just made. So Nalini, thank you, clarified the passive example that the first packet reveals a lot about the flow, and so we sorted some text out there. Bill Juris clarified active method attribute number 1. Mike Ackerman kind of proposed this problem statement, and I really appreciated the kick in the butt to go try to do this. So he's offered his support for this as well. And Phil Erdley, one of my co-authors on other things, also pointed to the need to clarify the graphical representation, this two-dimensional thing that I'll get to in a few moments. And he posed 2 new methods of measurement to categorize, so that's helpful as well. And I've started to do that. So right in the original classifications, I had 2 dimensions on a graph that looks like this, and since I can go back and forth so easily, I will do that. The y-axis tried to capture the degree to which the measurement stream affected network conditions, which is probably too broad an expression of that. And then the methodological advantages of the known stream characteristics, like you know how many packets are in a stream, and you know when they're going to begin and what the packets look like. That's another dimension for comparison. So you can go from complete control over the stream in some active forms to none, pure passive, purely observational. So we started out with this as the 2-dimensional version, and all of the all of the active forms which have a varying degree of effect on the network end up pretty much along the y-axis here. So if you're trying active measurement with a maximum capacity, trying to determine the maximum capacity of a path, then you've probably affected network conditions in some larger way than if you're just sending the load of a typical user or using an extremely sparse random distribution stream, like the kind of thing that was used in IPPM, RIPE and Advanced and some of the other systems early on. So, and then along the x-axis, we have the stream characteristics completely known to where we don't know anything. And the pure passive is way out at the far side there. PDM is somewhere in between. Coloring, I think, is somewhere in between, with a lesser or greater effect on the network. So I started to look at the different dimensions of categorization, mostly focusing on this y-axis first. How can we decompose effect on network conditions? And I thought that a couple of ways to look at this might be the effect on the measured stream itself, the effect on the unmeasured flows that share the path, and the effect on network state or adaptation. In other words, features in the network under test that have some interaction with the streams that are being measured. So I looked at the degree to which, so this is all the same x-axis where it's more severe to less severe, and I looked at these three, the key has somehow, oh, look at that. Wait a minute, I can fix this. I can fix this. Oh, crap. So there it is, the effect. So blue is the effect on the stream itself, red is the effect on other flows, and green is the network reaction. Everybody got that? Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting to look how these paired up. That the effect on the stream itself and the effect on other flows for the active max capacity or the active typical user, they seem to be running parallel for the most part. Same thing with the Phil Erdley proposed an example which was basically, let's observe a user stream, but we'll load up the network separately. So we're launching a bunch of active traffic, but observing passively a user stream that's in progress. And so, I looked at these dimensions, and there actually is a lot of correlation here between the blue and the red. And I also kind of think that even though the green is important, it's a little bit orthogonal to the original design of the, not completely, but a little bit orthogonal to the original design of the stream. In other words, when you have a reactive network, something that's going to react to the traffic that you're sending, the network state may change because of that. Cellular networks are a pretty good example of that. And that's why I threw in cellular here in this example. If it's a typical user on cellular, now you're going to get channel resources allocated to you when you first try to join and send traffic. So that's a difference I tried to point out there. But I'm not sure we need to make that distinction here in this set of three. It may just be enough to kind of combine the first two and talk about them more generally. Matt?
Matt Mathis, there's a class of metrics. I think it's sort of independent of the study, but it illustrates some of the things that might come up in the future. Class of metrics we haven't thought about at all, and that is dual stream interaction tests to measure essentially jitter isolation in multiple queuing systems. And one could imagine hybrid ways where one of the streams is active, one of the streams is passive. One can imagine dual active. And one can even imagine dual passive. If you look at the REMCAT charter, there's a paragraph in it about having built-in diagnostics. That's actually a request for a dual passive jitter diagnostic.
Interesting.
It doesn't use that language.
Okay, that's something we should talk about some more. So, like in the graph in section 4, I talked about two classifications: the PDM, which is Nalini and Mike and some other folks' proposal. The method may have small effect on the measured stream, but the measured stream initially has unknown characteristics until it's observed and processed to add the PDM destinations option header. So this is ending up as a hybrid thing. And then coloring, which I was thinking as changing some bits that are visible and could have an effect on the network. But the method may have a small effect on the measured stream, possibly less than PDM. Depends on the characterization. But it's also, the measured stream has unknown characteristics. So it kind of has both active and passive attributes. They both do, really, and so I put these in the hybrid category. So I'd like to continue adding examples in section 4, because this is the place where where probably the greatest discussion is going to take place. But as Marcelo mentioned, it's important to move the definitions forward. So I'd like the working group to consider working group adoption of this draft. It's had plenty of readership and feedback on the list, I think, just my take. And well, let's consider that as the whole draft. But I'm also willing to make a compromise on maybe putting off some of the more controversial stuff that's not fully baked.
So is that a call for adoption today?
Yeah.
Who's read the draft? It's pretty good for this room. 6. 6 to 8, actually. There are a couple in the back that were, thought I counted more than 6. And we have basically 2 drafts in this space. So the question would be, do we want to use this as the basis and then bring in contributions from the other draft? Because Greg said we'd be interested in taking this forward, sort of a merged thing together.
So what I'd like to do is move something faster forward.
Okay. Well, I mean, once it's a working group document, then its working group has change control, and we can pull things in from the other document.
But maybe it would be a tight and small thing, so that it would move fast enough to support the registry draft, as Marcelo put it. In other words, I think with the passive framework, there's more work to do, just like there is in section 4 of this draft. So maybe the place to compromise here would be to talk about the working group adopting sections 1, 2, and 3, which include the definitions and the scope and the.
That seems fraught with peril to me. Well, I mean, I would do it the other way. I'd say, do we want to adopt this as the basis for this work item, with the understanding that sections 1, 2, and 3 are pretty baked, and everything else we will consider as part of the working group change control on that, as to how or whether we take that forward.
Okay.
That would be how I would want to phrase that question. Do we want to, in the line, we're discussing that question now? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there's a lot of stuff here where there's potential for a huge amount of hair splitting, and I don't think the hair splitting is so important. We want to get it out, and some of these things might not be necessary.
So you're kind of thinking maybe along the same lines I was, that section 4 a bit controversial.
Or if section 4 converges, it's fine. If section 4 generates debate, cut it out.
Yeah. So leave that decision open. Yeah. Okay.
Greg Mirsky Erickson. I would still like us to first discuss the merge of the documents.
So you'd like to discuss a merger before adoption?
Yes.
Who's read the first document? We got 2.5. I've skimmed it. I don't know that the room has the ability to answer that question at this point if we only have 2 people who've read it. I think we do have a need to get this out in order to get the registry draft out for LMAP. And it seems like that's at least a 1 meeting cycle ask, right? Because now we have to spin the room up and get everybody. I mean, we need to get the same amount of people who have read both documents and figure out how we're going to do the merger before adoption. I'd prefer, in order to get this done quickly, to do the adoption on the basis of the one that has had more readership and then bring text in from the other and bring contributions in from the other. That seems to me like it's a faster way forward. Opinions on that point? Greg, you still have the microphone, so you can have.
I like your proposal because we start with something and then we iterate.
Yes.
Right? And so we have something out there. Michael Cloberdance. Al, I realized I had read this draft before as I was rereading this morning. There's a lot about it that I like. I think it has the potential to become foundational with a couple other documents, so I really like it. I have just a minor comment, and that minor comment is all terms, acronyms that are in the paper need to be defined. Specifically,
Okay.
PDM is not. But you give a link to it. You give
Yes.
links, which is great, but you never said what it was.
Sorry.
No, just minor comment.
Yeah, thank you. You're good at finding those, Mike.
Yeah, Kulevin. So I think that's a good starting point. I have a question that's independent of adoption. So this is mainly speaking about how to set up your measurements, or what you have to have in your mind to design your measurement, right? Is there any plans to also talk about how to analyze those measurements results, like the errors you could make because you designed your measurement in a certain way, something like that?
I hadn't planned to do that. Shall we talk about it a bit, maybe by email or something?
I also have not a clear idea, but there's usually a dependency on how you design your measurement, and like you can decide you can have two different measurements and try to answer the same questions and get two completely different results just because you designed the measurement differently.
Absolutely.
So there is a dependency, and I think that would be really valuable to discuss somewhere. I'm not sure if this is the right document.
It may already be mentioned to some degree in the IPPM framework. So I think we should investigate that, the degree to which that is done. I think this would ultimately update the framework. So if we want to update that section too, we might be able to do that there. I think it's a very interesting suggestion, Maria. Let's talk some more about it.
It's certainly discussed in the framework with respect to the active side of things. It's not clear how much that discussion applies to passive measurement.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Okay.
And that is something that's a good point. I think we definitely want to take that on, whether that is in this document or in the document that follows off of this document is, I think, an open question. But it's definitely something that we need to address.
Yeah.
Mike Ackerman, I'd like to thank you for your efforts here. I think this is a great start, and as one person said, I think this will serve as a foundation, and it'll allow some of our other individual efforts to move ahead more quickly without dispute and debate. So thank you.
Thank you.
One moment. So I want to understand so there seem to be two options here. We either go ahead and adopt this, or we wait for a merged individual draft that pulls in the other framework draft and updates this draft where that one would. I don't see an advantage to doing that individual as opposed to having working group change control on this document as a basis. And so I think Greg disagrees with me, and please, yeah, okay.
I don't disagree. I think I have a compromise proposal.
Okay.
Adopt this document, but merge author groups in working group document.
Al, how do you feel about that?
I didn't understand the second part of the proposal. I understood the working group adoption of this draft.
Right. Yeah. Start process for working group adoption of this document, and merge working group of both documents together in a working group document. So to have that Both groups own the new working group document together.
To be clear, the working group owns the working group document once it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
groups, author groups. Author groups, merge author groups of two documents in the new working group document.
Yeah, see, I can't agree to that because I haven't read your draft.
Okay, then maybe it will be a precondition for working group adoption.
Okay.
So I take that as not doing that is would be on your case a strong objection to making a call for adoption.
Well, okay, in fairness, this other document exists for time, and we've been presenting it and working on it, and now if this is not part of the working group document, it's obviously for the working group to decide, but I think that it will be, because we're demonstrating that we're interested in the subject.
Let me propose an alternate. So I have a real personal problem with throwing author groups together without throwing text, right? Because then you're essentially saying, okay, here's the editorial group, but now you have authors on a document that don't have any text in that document, and I have a real problem with that. That's not a policy thing. That's just I'm not. I mean, you can ask Bill, but I'm not going to do that. Let me propose the following compromise. We make a call for adoption with a direction to the authors of the two groups to get together and figure out what can be merged. And when we figure out what can be merged, then we look at the authorship group of the merged document. So,
Can I make an alternate proposal?
Okay.
The scope of this document that we're considering is really just about the definitions.
Yes.
It's not intended to be a full framework for passive and active measurement, which, from what I understand from Greg's document, is the role of that document.
So
they really are two different things. I don't understand the need to merge them.
So what I would see for merging would be going through, because there has been a fair amount of work in that document about there's a terminology section that says TBD, but the terminology itself is used implicitly through the rest of the definition of the framework. The idea would be to take input from that work and see if it informs changes to the terminology in this document in ways that would be useful. Right? I don't think that we want to scope the thing and have here's a gigantic framework because we'll never be done. Right? And this we need to get out.
Right. So if it's looking at the way that document has used terms,
yes,
I think we can do that separately and continue. Greg and his team can continue to work on their framework, but then we can say, let's see how their work informs this document. And in fact, this document was written, to be fair, this document was written that because many of us made comments about exactly this picture,
right,
and the fact that there were hybrid things in between. This is the first version of the passive framework draft, which
this isn't really a framework draft.
This is not. No, I'm saying Greg's version Greg's version of this framework draft for passive measurement is the first one that acknowledges hybrid. So this draft has begun to have an influence on that terminology.
So what are we saying? Are we saying, so I think I'm hearing that you're suggesting a definition document and that becomes a framework document.
Yeah.
And they both need to complement each other.
They need to be coordinated, but we can move this one faster if it's just really about definitions. And I think that's what we need to do.
So Greg, what do you think?
Again, I want to point that, yes, the topic of the hybrid offers discussed and we try to state out, but the definition and discussion on what constitutes the passive measurement method been in a document from the beginning. So, and that's where there is a common area between this document and the framework document. The passive measurement discussion and the definition.
So what I think I hear is that you're saying that you have definitions in your document that should go into a definition document, essentially.
At least in my view, that's what we can work together on.
Okay.
And we are interested in discussion of the hybrid because, yes, I agree, especially based on a discussion previous presentation in Honolulu. After the presentation, we decided, yes, we need to pay attention and discuss the hybrid methods in more details. Thus, we added this new section. But the passive measurement were in scope and actually is, because it's a framework, and we're not only talking about the framework, but definition and interpretation of what passive measurements and metrics are. So I think that that's what we can contribute to this document.
So I think the way to do that would be to look at the definitions in the two documents and see how these definitions need to be modified to include any additional points. But the reality of this situation is that passive, as defined, is very passive. It's based on observation, and that's the way the community's been using these terms. So I think that what we've heard is that this representation of these two ends of active and passive is what the community expects to see in these definitions. I appreciate that a small group has been working and defining these terms maybe somewhat differently. As I said, I haven't read the draft, but it's still got to respect the common usage in the community. That's where this draft, I believe, came from, and what I think we've heard the community confirm.
Yeah. So as I mentioned in our presentation, so we do have interpretation and definition of the passive measurement, which is different from this. And yes, it's different from implicit interpretation of the passive measurement by many. And I think that is valid change because their technology is changing. Because we are developing new encapsulations that can accommodate new methods in an absolutely passive way regarding the network. So the technology evolving, and I think that we need to be forward-looking, not only describe their past.
But those, well, I would just say that that methods that take advantage of features in protocols for encapsulation are passively observing those features. In other words, even if that's always what's been done in passive measurement. There's nothing new there. Nalini, I think you wanted to.
Yeah, and I'm going to cut the line on this particular discussion after Nalini.
Yeah. Just thank you, because actually we did want to present at the end.
Yeah,
So,
we're trying to get you there.
yeah. So just real quick on this is, I was one of the original authors, and a bunch of my words were in the passive, and because I tried to do my best to define that original passive stuff. And actually, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I don't know what, it's like I've been kind of inactive on this on Greg's draft, but if I might suggest that we have one foundational document, which is Al's, or the working groups now, and then we work together and not be having definitions in 3, 4, 5 different places, and then just get one thing out that's got, that we can get out. Framework is a complex thing. Yes. And I know a lot of the argument in London was about the definitions, and so I am really glad that you did this.
Thank you.
So I'm going to take a series of hums now to get this into the room. If you agree that it makes sense to have a separate definitions document from a framework document that talks about a descriptive architecture, including passive measurement. So if you believe that separating these two documents out as opposed to having a single unified document is a useful thing, hum now. If you believe that it's not useful to have a separate document, that all of these need to be in the same document so that you have a unified framework of everything, hum now. that seems pretty decisive. So I think we want to go ahead with a document that has this scope. Would there be any strong objections in the working group to adopting this document with a direction to the authors to go back and look at the framework document and ensure that you don't have any holes here based on that work? Okay, would there be, okay, so he doesn't object, excellent. Does anyone else object to that way forward? Okay. I'd like to then take a hum. Would the working group like to adopt Draft Morton IPPM Active Passive 01 as a working group document for the definitions in active, passive, and hybrid measurement? Hum now. And not to adopt? Please send us draft IETF IPPM Active Passive 00.
It shall be done when I get a computer.
Thank you very much. Actually, no, I can't say that. We have to take that to the list, but we do have to take that to the list. So we'll do the call for adoption. I'll put that in my outgoing queue, and we'll get that done within the next couple of weeks.
So I'd also asked attendees to read the framework document because we had very few readers. It'd be interesting, useful to have, I guess, an informed IPPM group on what the two drafts are all about.
All right, thank you very much. Moving forward, and now we have caught up with all of the time that we saved for ourselves. Draft 10 IPPM coloring-based IPFPM framework.
Okay, good morning. My name is Mark Chen. I'm going to present this marking-based IP flow performance management framework. Okay, so the motivation, that is, we know the measurement that rely on injected packet to measure performance measurement has limitations. There's a requirement to measure the real performance of the traffic. So we propose this IP performance measurement. It is intended to measure the real traffic, and it also supports multi-point to multi-point flow measurement, and with data correlation, and it can support some degree of reordering, packet reordering, and with this it can support SRA verification, fault localization, and fault delimitation. So here is the component of this IP FPM. Actually, they have two components of this IP FPM. One of them is MCP, that is responsible for collecting the measurement data and connecting the performance metric based on the data. And the other one is the measurement agent. That is responsible for executing the measurement. And that is, for example, to marking the packet, to count the packet, to record the timestamp, and report static information to the MCP for path calculation, for the performance calculation. And also in this framework, we propose the period number that is used to correlate the count timestamp that is collected from distributed MAs. Then MCP can use this period number to correlate which time counts and which timestamp belong to a certain block. So here is about this, how use this marking-based method to measure the packet loss. I'm not going to introduce more detail about this solution. It's very straightforward. That is, use one more bit to mark the packet and divide the flow into different consecutive blocks, and counting based on each block and then calculate how many packets get lost. So the packet delay is one of this matter. Is one. There are two actually in this draft. There are two methods proposed for packet delay. One is this one. That is just marking one packet in a certain period, and measure the packet delay based on that packet. Of course, to measure the packet delay, we need the time synchronization is required. This is another method to measure the packet delay. This is called average delay. In this method, you need to mark every packet of each block, and the calculate is based on all the time steps of the packet for each block. That is sum of all the timestamp and divided the total number of packets of that block. The average delay between the two nodes is calculated by subtracting the relative average timestamp. With this method, we can reduce the bias of sparsity sampling, and also with this method, one bit can both for loss and delay measurement. So there, you want to know the detail of this method, you can read the relevant draft list below. Here's about this, how this IPFPM can support the multi-point and multi-point to multi-point model. That means that for specific flow, there can be for example, the source and the destination may be in the customer side, and the network in between is belong to the service provider. And at the service provider network, for a certain flow, it can be monitored at multiple ingress PE and or multiple egress PEs. So with this, in this framework, we propose this multi-point model, and use the period number and flow ID to correlate which count and which timestamp belong to which block. There's more detail about this multi-point to multi-point. And also, there are some consideration about the packet reordering tolerance. Since the ECMP and the multipass is very common in the network, so there may be packet reordering. So in order to allow for a certain degree of packet reordering, we propose a method to address this issue. That means in the receive end, the read timer is intended to delay a certain period. That is in order to guarantee all the packet from that packet all the packet has already been counted or timestamped. So here's about the history and progress of the draft. The draft was submitted as draft 10 tolerance-based IPPF framework, and after IETF 87 and the IPPM working group requirement at the passive measurement included, so they submit the draft to this working group. And the zero version, there are new author from Vodafone and Semic, and join this work, and then there are China Unicom join to the 01 version, and after IETF 19 meeting, based on the suggestion from the chair, we split this draft into two drafts. One is about the framework, and other one is about the report. That means how to report information from the MA to the MCP. And also we do some have did some structure change and terminology change to the draft, and also there are new author from Ericsson, Greg, joined this work. Here's about this latest draft since that version. There are new author from Telecom Italy, Giuseppe joined this work, and we also made some reference to the AirMap reference model, and adding a new delay measurement, the average measurement, and also do some editorial changes to this draft, to this version. So here's a summary of this draft. The author thinks that the current draft is stable, and the method is straightforward and flexible measurement, and it's a whole system, and it can support fault tolerant and support data correlation, and it is favored by multiple operators, and also there's running code and real implementations. So we hope this working group can consider how to adopt this draft as working group draft, and also will, of course, any comments and review are always welcome. Okay, that's all about this.
Are you asking for an adoption call at this time?
Yeah, if this working group thinks it's the right time.
Okay, would we like to talk about that? Mike?
Just a quick question.
You can.
Mike Ackerman.
You can twist the mic up. That looks a little uncomfortable there. There you go.
Need shorter legs. My question is, in terms of implementation, is it still in the IP header in v4 and in an extension header in v6?
Actually, both. Although the current bit is not included in this draft, but for the IPv4, IPv6, there's no reserve bit that can be used for this kind of range. But for subscriber, if you can guarantee that the standardized flag is not used by other functions that can be used for this kind of work. So of course, as Greg presented in the first slide, that this is maybe better for new encapsulation.
Yep. I think this should be adopted somehow, and my motivation there is, if we do require some reserve bits in the IP headers, we have better publish that requirement and make sure it's taken into account by, say, the IPv6 maintenance team or by teams like that, so it becomes part of the recommendation. Because otherwise, I mean, we are going to see conflicting use of bits, and it's a very legitimate use of bits in the header, but it should be actually reserved.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So that would be in. Hi. There's an internet area director here. So that's 6-man for the IPv6 stuff, and where does the IPv4 stuff go? Actually, I wanted to ask you this question anyway on the next draft as well. I was happy to see you here.
Brian Haberman, Internet Area Director. Yes, everything IPv6 related should be at least mentioned to 6-man. Whether the explicit work gets done here and reviewed by 6-man, or we think it's important to be done in 6-man is up for debate, and always willing to have that discussion. IPv4. Wasn't that last century's protocol?
Okay, so they can just have any bits they want in IPv4. They can just like sort of like randomly scribble all over.
So the best I could give you right now is we generally use the int area working group as the last resort place if there's something int related that needs to be done. But that is up for adoption calls that could be rather contentious if you try and do things that are v4 only.
Yes.
As a note.
Understood. Yep, Brian, don't leave. I got more questions. No, I don't leave the room. I got more questions for you on the next draft as well.
Matt Mathis, this is the bit that you're proposing is the one that was the subject of the April Fool's RFC a few years back, the so-called evil bit. Is that correct?
I'm sorry.
Okay. True. Because that bit has already had a number of proposals for using it shot down. And the problem is a process when you do that. All of those people who were previously shot down sharpen their knives when you propose to do it, something that's less valuable than their perceived use. I find it inconceivable that this will make it through the process. And so the question is, how much do we as a working group want to invest in it, in something that is going to, has an infinitesimal chance of deployment as a generic standard. What I do see it as an opportunity to do is suggest in other protocols, like tunnel protocols, allocating bits for this purpose by default. In fact, even doing coloring by default would give you, as I mentioned earlier, OAM on tunnels, which is something that could be extremely valuable. But it's not something that you can specify. You can only sort of provide a recipe that other people should consider using it.
Yeah, actually the current draft is mainly focused on the framework, thing about how current-based method can be applied to measure the performance of vehicle traffic. The current-based thing is not in the scope of this draft. As discussed, as we know that if we want to, it's very difficult to use a bit from IPv4 or IPv6, but we can find, but it's,
please make it extremely brief.
This draft is only about the framework, not about the considering bits, current bits.
If the end system is participating, you can in fact allocate IP IDs such that you have a coloring property that isn't native to the use of that field, because it doesn't conflict with other use.
What I'm hearing with the chair hat is there needs to be more technical discussion about this on the list before we're ready to adopt it. What I'm saying without my chair hat is that I would really, really like to see evaluations of, if we're talking about doing stuff like this on the open internet, I'd like to see evaluations of how transparent the paths in the internet are to this. So this goes back to, this is wearing my Hobbs hat, I guess, which looks kind of like this because it's been bit reordered by a middle box. But I think that there needs to be a little bit more work done on that. So I would take the discussion of this back to the list. Thank you. Coming up.
Thank you.
Nalini, we promised you 15, we got you 11. And I want 4 of those for discussion at the end. So if you can do this in 7, that'd be great.
Yeah, we're going to go really, really quick. So Mike and I, and then we have Rob participating remotely. We're going to go like super quick on this so we can have a discussion. Okay? So how do you do the next thing? Oh.
Okay, so at the last meeting we presented a lot of the architectural and implementation details of PDM, and we were besieged with a few questions and pieces of interest, which we addressed on the list and via phone calls and meetings. And what we're going to do now is just do a little summary of that. So some of the questions that we have is, does PDM have enough variables to make this happen? And the answer, of course, is yes. And we're going to go into detail on that, but we think we've covered almost all the bases that we need to for doing high-level network triage. Go back just one second. one thing we did want to point out that clarified it for a lot of people is that PDM isn't going to be a panacea by itself. It works with other tools and other bits in the header and other pieces of information that we have today. In fact, the original reason for PDM is that IPID is going away, and we put that back in. So, are there too many fields? Are they all necessary? And we think the answer is yes. We kind of covered that last time, but we're going to go over that in a little detail with some examples in just a minute. And why do it in the extension header? Because we think that's the perfect place. There are some issues with that, just like Mark was talking about. When you go over the global internet, there may be some issues with that. But the other thing is that if we do it in the extension header, we're doing it at the IP layer, and then we can cover all the upper layer protocols, which if it was an all TCP world today and tomorrow, maybe that wouldn't be so much of an issue, but even then there's some facilities in TCP that make this less than perfect, and we think that doing it at the IP layer is the right thing to do to accommodate all of those. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Nalini, who's going to expound on that.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so this is just a brief thing from Boeing, another very large end-user organization, to say why we have to do it in the IP layer. The IP layer is the commonality for large enterprises. The other thing too, the gentleman from Microsoft had brought up encryption. Now, if you might want to take a look at RFC 4303, page 18, which will let you see, I looked it up right before just to make sure. So what the idea is that if you're using a IPsec, which a lot of people are on the internet, then everything, your TCP header, TCP options, any kind of, if anybody wanted to do a shim, anything like that, that is encrypted. What is not encrypted is IPv6 extension header. So yay, Rob. Okay, next. That goes in the clear. We had questions about too much overhead, and so we did this little table to show 16 additional bytes is really not very much overhead at all. And depending on, of course, working it out as to how many bytes per packet, et cetera. And I will say too, there are content providers today who open 5, 6, 7 sessions for all the time, and one is transmitting ads and this and that and the other thing. And so maybe why don't we, if we're concerned about overhead, why don't we stop ads on the internet? So.
We did work pretty hard to get this down to 16 bytes with a lot of help from people like Brian.
Yes. Yeah, we cite Brian, yes. Thank you, Brian. Okay. So next. Brother. Okay, and there's some, now we're going to get into some chaos here. There's some actual RTTs. We're talking about, this happens in real live networks, and how much that we would be adding in real networks, and it really isn't very much, because, depending, some folks are actually operating at single microsecond level, and so for them, of course, 16 additional bytes, I mean, who actually cares?
And even on top of that, it's optional. You can turn it on or off at your behest.
Totally, yeah. Turn it on and off. Matt, did you? Okay. Yeah. Totally optional. Yeah. If you want to do it. If you don't want to, don't do it. Okay. Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff about PDM will only work for simple client-server apps. Not at all. And so go ahead. I'm not going to go like
examples follow. You got like a minute and a half if we're going to have discussion on this.
I'm not going to belabor this, but in the draft I go through and show how it will work for single wave, one wave flows, for multiple send flows. There's all kinds of flows, and we believe PDM will work very well in all those instances. I'm happy to take those questions offline. Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I had a question from the chair. We have a, more or less, this document is using a new IPv6 destination option code point.
Correct.
Of which there are 16 or 8 remaining. I tried to do the homework on this, but I've forgotten the number.
I thought it was 60. I thought it was 64. Brian. Yeah.
Yeah. So while while we're giving Brian the math test, this would very clearly be, so this is not like the IPv4 case where you're kind of going to wave your hands and say there's no way this is ever going to happen. In the IPv6 case, there's a working group for it. And you've taken this over to six-man. I saw this, and I've noticed that the six-man draft is updating
Correct.
to track this.
Correct.
What is the status of that document in six-man?
What we'd like to do, well, we haven't presented, we're waiting. What we're hoping for is that we go back to six-man with the support of IPPM, and we have a working implementation at the application layer. We hope to have a free BSD implementation by Prague.
And we're continuing to meet with members of six-man to be prepared for what it is they're going to want, and we did that yesterday.
Correct.
Okay.
The BSD option is what we're going to be doing next based on their recommendation.
Brian Haberman, what's the question?
I thought the internet area. So
it's an 8-bit field. It's an 8-bit field.
It's an 8-bit field, but 3 of them are defined for, like 3 of those bits are for the treatment and what you have to do.
They're basically control bits.
Yeah, they're basically control bits. It's a 5-bit field.
Right. Well, no. Please, no.
Oh, okay. This is why you're here. Thank you for correcting me.
So you can reuse the bottom 5 bit values if the upper 3 control bits are different.
Okay.
So there's some flexibility there.
Yeah.
I love that look, Bill.
Yeah, there's a lot more. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, because I looked at that and I'm like, this looks like I'm going to have to ask the internet AD in advance.
So it's not necessarily that you have all 8 bits to use.
Right, because yep.
But the lower 5 bits can be reused if the upper 3 bits differ.
Yep.
Right?
Okay.
And the IANA registry is very clear. It's IESG consensus or IETF standard action.
Yes.
So
it's got to have a 6-man draft. It's got to go through 6-man.
No.
No.
Okay. If you actually look at the registry, there are multiple entries in there that were done by other working groups.
And it just has the 6-man just has to have sort of right of first refusal on it then, or the internet area director's job is then to say, how does that work?
No.
Okay.
So we're not the bottleneck here.
Okay.
If the working group has consensus, it goes through IETF last call.
Okay. Yep.
It's going to be allocated, right?
Yep. Okay.
I mean, I don't want 6-man becoming the police for all these things because that means they have to become domain experts.
So would it make sense to take the definition of that? So right now this thing is split into 2 documents. Would it make sense to take the definition of the header field and move it back out of the 6-man document into this document and have a single document?
Fine.
Okay.
And if anybody wants to argue with me about it, feel free.
Okay.
That's actually exactly what I was going to say. It seems strange to have 2 documents.
Right.
There's
so
typically.
I'm a little bit guilty on this point. Like I basically said, if there's just doing the like about a year ago. Or
My
2 years ago,
understanding of the way that it would be done is most of the text of the other document would be put into the section which is IANA instructions.
Yeah.
Which go through last call with this document and then get stripped.
Okay.
So you caused this problem?
I caused this problem, yes. I caused this problem like 2 years ago.
You now have to change your first name.
So we can open a discussion on that. Does the working group have a new first name for the second chair? No. So, okay, that was very useful. Thank you, Brian, number 1. So the direction there is definitely pull this back into a single document.
Sure.
For your implementation, I'm assuming you're using the experimental code points. So there's for each of those bit fields, there's.
Yeah. Well,
please shake your head yes, or you're going to have a problem with the area director. Yeah. So we have 1 minute. What do you want to do with this draft right now?
Well, we'd love to, if it's appropriate, we'd love to see working group adoption. Do you think we're ready?
Send us back to 6-man.
I guess we don't need to go back to 6-man.
No, don't go back to 6-man. Pull it in. Keep talking to 6-man about it because that's where the experts are to do things, but we don't actually have to run anything through the entire process over there.
Right.
Are there any? Okay. Al, then Matt, then I'm closing the mic lines.
Reddit liked it. Here's to the universal deployment of PDM destination options.
That wasn't as much of a compliment as it sounded like.
After draft IPPM draft IETF IPPM, there's no constraint on names, and there is a convention to put 2 working group names in file names to call it to their attention, and that would help the process here.
So if you pull the
because then it will be on their radar that they need to
wow.
watch it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right. This working group has to be the first one.
Yeah.
So IPPM-6-man.
So
cool.
I don't think I want to do a call for adoption on a draft that is going to change drastically. We can do the call for, because we're not going to take 2 drafts and merge them into one draft and change the whole. Let's do it this way. Please remerge the documents.
Okay.
Call it again to 6-man's attention.
Okay.
And then we can do a call for adoption on the list. I don't think we need to wait for Prague for that.
Perfect.
And we'll have the discussion on the list if people think it's ready for that, obviously. But we don't necessarily need to wait for Prague.
Thank you.
As I understand the process, it really ought to be just pulling the text out of the other document into
it should
the
be
dynamic
it should be something you can
considerations.
do on the plane home.
Yeah. Merging the definition, of course. Yeah, we can do that. Yep.
Well, as the ideal gas law of IPPM agendas, we have yet another data point that the work will expand to fill the available time. We are now out of time. Please go over, if you're interested in the future of the future, please go over to the TSD area working group if you have a plane to catch. We will see you in Prague. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hats off.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Because you were so supportive, you get
Hi.
your
Woo! Thanks a lot. Yeah, and seriously, Nalini, make sure that the options use it's the code point in the IANA. It's like the bottom 5 bits are all ones.
Okay, I'll double check.
Yeah.
I
Make
just
sure
was grabbing it.
because this seems actually like a perfect hackathon thing.
There you go.
Oh, that's really cool, huh?
If you got some people who are going to be here who are going to be interested in it, this sounds like a perfect sort of thing to take to the hackathon and actually show working and to get. If you got BSD code, then people can. So it depends. Are you guys going to be in Prague, right? You going to be able to do that?
Well,
All right.
let me get it ready because I got the word out for FreeBSD hacker. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. He was saying like get it ready.
If you got some, for Prague, it's the Saturday before Prague, so you gotta come to Prague a little early.
Oh.
Yeah.
What a concept.
Brian. Oh, no, he's gone. All right. Spencer.
We got this thing for essentially